Sometimes the best franchises are the ones that keep failing over and over again, and then you get a lot of sympathy whatsoever. So the fact of the matter is that the aren't always the best around. For basketball, you could kind of say that the Charlotte Bobcats were terrible before they became the Hornets and became decent. Or maybe the Philadelphia 76ers, who haven't been the best, or even the Detroit Pistons. But the Pistons have gotten back to the playoffs and all that. But they now have the longest drought of home playoff games, losing 10 straight, breaking the Sixers record from the 60s. In football, you had in the old days Tampa Bay and New Orleans being lovable franchises, but then they started to win and all that. You can kind of say the Cleveland Browns for now. Baseball, you could always say the Marlins or even the Milwaukee Brewers or the Pittsburgh Pirates. And in hockey, it's no different. I mean, ragtag teams like San Jose starting to regress, Chicago's starting to regress. A lot of teams are starting to regress. What if I told you about a franchise that has not been to the Stanley Cup playoffs in 14 years? I kid you not. This is it. As of this taping, it's been 14 years since this team has made the Stanley Cup playoffs and all that. And of course, we're not going to talk about any what ifs with the Buffalo Sabres and making the playoffs. This is about a team that should have went to the finals and maybe win a title for once. Let's talk about the 1980 Buffalo Sabres. Hello out there, we're on the air. It's Cutter, what if NHL time? Tensions blow, the whistle blown, and the pucks go down the ice. Some teams just want to win the cup and do it with a smile. Hey, that is cool. Up on the River Nile. Oh, the good old hockey game. Who will come out on top? Will a team get through the cup by any means necessary? Oh, the good old hockey game. It's the best game you can name, and I'm have no shame. I will simulate those hockey games. Woo! So the Buffalo Sabres were created as an expansion team. Lots of people wanted Buffalo to have an NHL team because they had a popular AHL team called the Buffalo Bisons, with their logo being close to the red, white, and blue of the Pepsi logo. Buffalo would have some fans, especially from the Hamilton, Niagara area, because they can't always get up to do Leaf games, but they can go to Buffalo and be a little cheaper and be closer. So Buffalo had a chance to make it to 1967 in expansion the same year, well, the Great Expansion, but they failed, just like many other teams did. The fact of the matter is that the Buffalo Sabres were born. Buffalo being a great city and having the buffalo their own um, animal named after the city. Well, then the city's named after the buffalo. And then sabers with swords and all that. That's kind of mean and lean and all that. So the Buffalo Sabres logo was pretty cool with the buffalo charging buffalo at the top and then the sabers. Buffalo in 1970 was placed in the East Division alongside Vancouver, their expansion cousins, even though Vancouver obviously is nowhere near East. The Sabres actually got lucky getting the number one pick for the entry draft while facing Vancouver in a roulette wheel. Vancouver thought they had won the roulette wheel because they picked the low numbers and Buffalo the high numbers, and it landed on double I, which means two. But no, the roulette wheel was for 11. And thanks to that, the Buffalo Sabres got the first pick in the 1970 draft, and that was Gilbert Perreault, a major player from the Montreal Junior Canadiens of the OHA, or the OHL, if you will. You're thinking, Montreal had a team in the OHL? Technically, they did, for some odd reason. It's kind of weird because Cornwall was in the Quebec League, and Cornwall is definitely in Ontario. Nevertheless, Gilbert Perreault wore number 11 because of that. And he was a pretty good rookie, don't say so myself. The Sabres would actually not take too long to make things happen, as they were doing quite good. In 1975, led by Roger Crozier in the net, the Buffalo Sabres shocked a lot of people by getting to the Stanley Cup Finals. They took care of the Montreal Canadiens in the Stanley Cup semifinals to take on the Philadelphia Flyers. And of course, that was the season in which the fog game happened, in which Buffalo's Memorial Auditorium, which was not air conditioned, had the problems with the humidity, and basically fog was around it, and they had to stop the game several times. And that's when the bat came flowing, and former Kitchener Ranger Jim Lorenz swatted it out of midair with his hockey stick. The Sabres would win games 3 and 4 to tie the series with the Flyers up. Flyers won game 5 on home turf, but in game 6, the Flyers gave Buffalo nothing. Buffalo scored no goals, and the Flyers were Stanley Cup champs for the second straight year. Buffalo tried their best to replicate 1975, but just couldn't. We'll talk about the 1980 season in a little bit. But anyway, the Sabres in the mid 80s were nah, they weren't that bad. They even made a gusty move with the fifth pick in the 1984 draft, taking Tom Barrasso, a goalie from an American high school, no less. Buffalo took a massive gamble, and Barrasso was decent for them. And then they decided to trade him to Pittsburgh for the one of Doug frickin' Bodger. I know there were more, like Craig Simpson was also in that thing too, but still. Anyway, so the Sabres were okay and all that. In 1989, they suffered a horrific incident as Clint Malarchuk actually had his throat sliced open by the skate of Steve Tuttle from the St. Louis Blues in Buffalo Memorial Auditorium, and fans were sick to their stomachs. Don't blame them. The good news for Malarchuk is, yeah, he had over 300 stitches and came back in 10 days, which he should not have come back that soon. But he was alive. He could have died, but there were 2 major things why he didn't die. A is that Jim Petrocelli was a Vietnam War doctor, so medic doctor, so he knew what to do. And second of all, which doesn't get talked about, is the fact that where Malarchuk got cut actually saved him, because at the end of the ice in which he got slit, that was actually where the medical room was. If Malarchuk was on the other side of the ice, he was dead. People forget about that. Nevertheless, Buffalo was okay and all that. They had some great moments. 93, they were slated to get their butts handed to them by the Bruins in the playoffs, but Brad May won it in overtime. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Brad May wins it for in overtime. The Buffalo Sabres have beaten the Bruins. Next up, the Belle Provence. Oh, how do you spell second round? The great Rick Jeanneret call. Yeah, Rick Jeanneret was around for 50 plus years with the Sabres. I'm freaking real. Nevertheless, the Sabres made that, and then they got swept themselves. So it's funny. They sweep the Bruins, but then they get swept themselves by the Habitants in the next round. The Sabres had a famous playoff duel as Brodeur and Hasek would go toe-to-toe. Sabres Devils in the first round of the 94 playoffs. Went to Game 7 as predicted, and the Devils won. Dominik Hasek would be a big blessing for the Buffalo Sabres, as a massive trade with the Chicago Blackhawks got Hasek there. He was supposed to be the backup to Grant Fuhrer, but once Grant Fuhrer got hurt, Hasek basically made things happen for European goalies. Hey, 2 Hart Trophy winners for MVP. We'll do that to you. The Sabres would go on to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1999 at the expense of my beloved Toronto Maple Leafs. If Dominik Hasek was hurt the entire series, then I think the Leafs had a chance. But Hasek came back in Game 3 of the conference final after Dwayne Wilson split the first 2 games. And, they couldn't beat Hasek. Nevertheless, Buffalo took Dallas to Game 6, and of course, the famous triple overtime goal by Brett Hull that should not have counted and all that. But then the NHL sent a memo saying that those goals counted if the player had the skate but had the puck, had control of the puck. Where was the freaking memo to everyone? Then Buffalo would not have complained. Nevertheless, the Sabres got screwed, and they have not been bad. Mid-2000s, they looked decent, but Ottawa took care of them in the 2007 conference final. Daniel Everson scoring the winning goal in overtime, and a lot of Americans didn't watch that. If you didn't have Versus or relying on NBC, you didn't get to see the end of the game. You got to see pre-match for the Triple Crown. the Preakness. I think. Yeah, it was the Preakness. But nevertheless, the Sabres were okay. By 2011, they made the playoffs. They lost to the Flyers in Game 7, and then they're like, we'll be back. They haven't been back. Things are so bad. The Buffalo Sabres last time was 2011. Here's the major thing for the Sabres. The last time the Sabres made the playoffs, Sellers was a thing. I should know. I worked at Sellers. You know, the big Canadian department store chain before Walmart basically cut in on their territory. But yeah, Sellers was still alive at that time. Of course, he died in 2013. But anyway. So anyway, let's talk about the 1980 Buffalo Sabres. All right, so the 1980 Buffalo Sabres, this was the 10th season in the NHL. They actually won the Prince of Wales trophy for being the best regular season record in the Prince of Wales Conference. Not that it mattered because the NHL changed rules in 1980 playoffs. But in the 1979 NHL draft, they took Mike Ramsey from the University of Minnesota. Mike Ramsey was a member of the Miracle on Ice team in 1980 from the University of Minnesota. And then he went to Buffalo after the Olympics. Lindy Ruff was even drafted from Lethbridge. Yes, that Lindy Ruff, the coach who had a couple of stints with the Sabres. That's a joke. It's the definition of a joke. Jacques Cloutier, who was a decent, serviceable goalie for Buffalo, Chicago, and Quebec, was taken in the third round. And yeah, Lindy Ruff was a second round pick. Wow. The Sabres won the Adams Division with 110 points, with Boston, Minnesota, Toronto, and Quebec trailing behind. Of course, this is 1980 when the NHL decided to go from 1 to 16. It didn't matter what conference and what division you were in. You finished from 1 to 16, you get there. That's your playoff position. Before 1982, and which changed things up for the division. If it was 1982 rules, Buffalo would play Toronto and Boston would have faced Minnesota in the first round. But anyhow, they went from 1 to 16. Edmonton snuck in ahead of Washington by 2 points. Now, the reason why there were 16 teams was in the playoffs was because of the merger with the Whalers, the Oilers, the Nordiques, and the Jets coming in to make it a 21 franchise league. The NHL had to go 1 to 16. It would have been in some kind of divisional format. I believe Buffalo would have gotten a spot in the quarterfinals guaranteed. And the preliminary rounds would have had to happen. But yeah, Buffalo was the second best team in the NHL behind the Philadelphia Flyers. So that meant they got the number 15 seed Vancouver Canucks in the first round. The Canucks were 10 games below 500, but they were still there. Yeah, Washington, Detroit, Quebec, Winnipeg, and Colorado were all failures. So in the playoffs, they took on the Vancouver Canucks in the best of 5 and beat them 3-1. Then in the second round, they took on the number 7 Chicago Blackhawks and took down Tony Esposito in 4 straight games. And then they would take on the New York Islanders, the team that would be sprouting up 8 years after their debut. And somehow, in some way, they fucked it up to the Islanders and got the Islanders to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Flyers and started the Islanders dynasty. They did have Jim Schoenfeld, have another donut, have another donut. He actually won the plus minus award. Bob Sauvé and Don Edwards, Kitchener, won the Vezina Trophy. But that's when the Vezina Trophy, prior to 1982, it was to the goalies who played 25 or more games and were part of the team that gave up the fewest goals. So there wasn't one goalie. Danny Gear had the most goals in the NHL. I thought it was Blaine Stoughton. Guess not. Don Edwards was named second team All Star. Danny Gear as well. And Jim Schoenfeld, second All Star team. Bob Sauvé had the best goals against. I'm actually not sure who was the star goalie. I think Bob Sauvé was the star goalie in the playoffs, I think. So anyway, let's see what happens if acting on instinct. I think Bob Sauvé was the starting goalie in the playoffs for the 1980 Sabres. They take on the 1980 Philadelphia Flyers, 1 versus 2 in the NHL. The Flyers would have home ice just like they normally do. Yeah, the 1-16 thing is weird. There's Bill Barber, Kitchener, doing it. So Pete Peters was the starting goalie for the Flyers that playoffs, such as Bob Sauvé for Buffalo. Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals in this simulation would have the Sabres go to Philly and win 7-5 at the Spectrum. Danny Gear made it 1-0. Bill Barber, Kitchener, made it 1-1. Brian Propp Remember him? Made it 2-1. Brian Prop and Bob Hound County made it 4-1. It looked like the Flyers were going to win this game. It looked over. But then Derek Smith, Danny Gare, and Richard Martin made it 4-4. Perot made it 5-4. Reggie Leach made it 5-5. But Perot scored at 18:52. And with 1 second left, Rick Martin scored the winning goal. I mean, the other goal. Poor Lindy Ruff only getting 133. Wait a minute. Dave the Hammer Schultz played for the Sabres in 1980? I see Rob McClanahan, former member of the American Ice team. I'm surprised Rob McClanahan was a Sabre. Tony McKechnie, Rick Seeley. Oh, I guess Mike Ramsey wasn't part. There's Craig Ramsey. Where's Mike? Area Philly. Only 2 minutes for Mel Bridgman, Jack McElhaney, and a minute 8 for John Paddock, future head coach. There's Bobby Clark with only 13 minutes of Paul Holmgren. So anyway, Perot, Prop, and Garrett are your 3 stars. Sabres won game 1. Yeah, Dave Schultz got injured. Who cares? Game 2 sees the Sabres crush the Flyers 4-1 and take a 2-0 lead. As Frank Boff got ejected for a 5-minute major for cross-checking and got ejected. So Jack McElhaney had to serve the penalty. After that penalty, and Moose Dupont in the box for holding a 2-man power play, Danny Gare made it 3-0. Perot and Derek Smith scored. And then Bane Wilson got ejected for elbowing, so McElhaney had to come in. So Bane Wilson had to be out. So 2 Flyers were gone. Rick Seeley, Kitchener, made it 4-0. And then Paul Holmgren, yes, him, the future head coach, made it 4-1. So yeah, the Sabres were clean. Lindy Ruff got 4 minutes. John Paddock got 31 seconds. But yeah, 17 minutes for Bane Wilson, 15 for Frank Buff, and he got ejected. 2 ejections did not help. Seeley, Derek Smith, and Joe Perot are your 3 stars. Sabres are halfway there, back on home turf in the small arena. They win 5-2. Sabres scored first Rick Martin, and then Kenny Linsman made it 1-1. Danny Gare made it 2-1, and then 2 goals by Sugar Pro 4-1. Derek Smith made it 5-1. Phil Meyer had to come in the net. Bob Hound County made it 5-2, and that was it. Yeah, there's Mike Ramsey. 2 minutes of play. King on Corrupt. So yeah, so McClanahan got injured. But anyway, Perot, Gare, and Martin were your 3 stars. So Pete Peters is not getting it done. Phil Meyer will have to come in for the rest of the series if need be. And that's it. And that's it. Philly tried. Philly thought they had it. Philly had like we're gonna get rid of Pete Peters. No you don't. The Buffalo Sabres would have won the Stanley Cup, and the Flyers still would have not have had it. Bill Barber did score, and then on a double minor, the Sabres could only do it 1, as Rick Martin scored, but that was it. Rick Seeley made it 2-1. Larry Playfair and Schubert Pro made it 4-1. Lensman made it 4-2. Danny Gare made it 5-2, and that was it. The Sabres win on their home ice. Yeah, they on the on the small ice, but they won twice at the Spectrum. So the Sabres took care of the Flyers. And Dave the Hammer Schultz gets revenge on his former team. Pretty much saying, you had the balls to get rid of me? The hell with you. Anyway, Perot, Gare, and Martin were your 3 stars at the odd, and the Buffalo Sabres, with Bob Sauve in the net, would win the Stanley Cup, and the Sabres wouldn't have to go 0-2 in finals in history. Just saying. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.